Okay, so we'll continue where we left off in the last session. So if you would recall from our last session, we were looking at different types of charts that we can create in different scenarios. So based on the data, what we are trying to analyze or what we are trying to show. So yeah, so last time we completed distribution part, we have completed relationship part. We are about like halfway done on the comparison part on the top. So we compared all the different situations or data scenarios where we have to compare across time, over time. So today we'll cover the rest of it. We'll do the comparisons part among items, and we will also go to the composition and quickly finish those two parts. So let me zoom in a little here. So, okay. So first of all, I'll just toggle between, there are two variants of this chart. So some details are for some of the particular charts, some details are present better in one chart, and for other charts they are present in another better. So I'll just toggle between these two charts. They are pretty much similar, just the style is slightly different. Okay, so and I'll also use the same sample superstore data set. I've connected me right. Okay, so first of all, let's go to our first chart type in the comparisons. Okay, so if we see the comparisons, we have finished over time and across items. Okay, so this is like telling, as I said in the last session as well, so instead of comparing, hey, how are my sales moving across or changing over time, instead of saying, hey, how are my sales in each of these different product segments, how are my sales in each of these different regions, so that is like comparison across items. So and within that same, let's say we have few items that we want to compare with each other, and we were trying to see how many variables are we trying to compare in these categories. Are we trying to compare one variable, or we are trying to compare two variables, let's say sales and profit, both the variables at a time on these categories. So it so there we have different cases, and similar branches are provided here. So if you're trying to compare among items, one variable per item, and there are few categories. Okay, so let me actually, it's slightly confusing in the chart here. Let me just quickly jump to Tableau and give an example of the same. Let's say I've connected to my sample superstore data, and I want to I have a product field which basically tells me what category, subcategory, and manufacturer that the particular product comes from, and I also have few other category fields, which is called segment. So which segment does the consumer who purchased that product belong to? Does it belong to a consumer segment, or a corporate segment, or some other segment? There are three segments overall. So if you see consumer, corporate, or home office, three segments overall. So let's say if I want to compare sales, okay, since there is only one variable for the time being, is let's take sales as our variable of interest, and we want to compare sales of each of these segments, okay, across categories. So that what I mean by that is, let me I'll take my segment. So category, and I'll drop my sales into here. Right, so what it's doing here is, within each category, so there is a furniture category, the office supply category, and technology category. It's giving me how my sales across different consumer segments are varying. So within furniture, lots of sales is majorly coming from consumer segment, and next corporate, and likewise. So let me just color this by segment, or yeah, I think that. So each color is a particular segment. So this is what the first chart that we are trying to look at in the this chart guide is trying to show. So we are looking at one variable per item. There are few categories and few items. So let me explain what I mean by that. So there are few categories. What are categories here? The category field here itself, the one on the furniture, supplies and technology, this itself is our category, acting like a category field. And within each category I have few items. What are the items here? The segment consumer, corporate and home office. So obviously, as I said, anything that is less than 4 or at max 5 we can consider as a number as few. So since this is 3, which is well and good. So under each category there are few items, and we are trying to compare one metric, one variable for each of these items. So this sort of a bar chart typically is sufficient for that sort of scenario. Now let's say in the same few categories section, instead of few items per each category, let's say we have many items. In that case we have to go with something called a vertical bar chart. So something called a vertical bar chart here, as we can see. So it's also pretty straightforward to create. Let's say I'll duplicate this, and what I'll do is, so I'll keep the category same, I'll remove segment and I'll add subcategory. Okay, if you see instead of category also, let me take out that and let's just go with maybe segment. So that way, just a minute for so if you see here, let me color it accordingly. So with here our category becomes our segment field, and the items becomes the number of subcategories in each of those segments. So we can see there are at least a 12, which is far beyond what our limitation for a word few. So in this sort of scenario, this type of a chart wouldn't make much sense, or it's easy to go interpret. So what we have to go with is something called a vertical bar chart. So what we have to do is this and this. So that will give us for each of the segment, consumer and corporate and home office, we have now all the 12 subcategories splitting the sales accordingly. So this is far better to interpret than the previous chart, and also visually little more appealing than far more appealing in fact than the previous chart. So this is a vertical bar chart. This is, so you understand the situation. Whenever there are few items to compare across categories, we'll go with this one, and whenever we have multiple items, we opt for this one. And going back to our, let's say instead of few categories, let's say if we have many categories, okay, in that case we kind of go with the grid kind of chart. Let's quickly look at what that is.
Jagdish, I think that is also called as a table lens view, right? What you just built just now for the many categories.
This one?
This one. I think it's also called as a table lens view.
Table lens view. Okay. Okay. I'm not aware of it. Okay. Table lens. Okay. Good point. So I think we have, okay. So moving on to the next one, we have many categories section. Here now our categories field, as earlier they were only less than 3 or 4. Now they are also become more than that. So we call something called a table with embedded charts. So let's see how to create that. So let's get back here, open a new sheet. Let's select our fields, for example. Okay, let's say I have segment as one of my category. I have 3 fields there, and let's say I also have my category, which also holds 3 values. And let's say take one more just for the exam, for this sort of a chart. Let's say we are trying to compare not only across these 2 categories, but we have to compare across one more category. Let's say maybe a region. Okay, let me quickly make the chart. So let's say for each segment I want to look at, okay, I think I did that. For each segment, across each region. Okay, I want to look at my sales. Where are my sales? I'll drop them in here. So I got my bars. Now let's say if we have to include one more field, which is category, and I'll just place it here. Okay, and let me color this by this one, category, and let's just hide this for the time being. Show header. Okay, tab view, and let's just let me do a couple of formatting and get back to how to read the chart. So this is what table grid chart normally looks like. So what's happening here is we have three dimensions. One is segment, one is region. Segment is going across column, so each column that we see is a particular segment, and region is going across rows, so each region is a particular region. I'm sorry, each row is a particular region, and the category is kind of displayed in the form of a color. So in this particular 1 by 1 place in this 3 by 4 matrix, so we can see how the sales in consumer segment from central region are placed across. Let me just pull out the labels in each of the category fields. So this is when we want to compare across different multiple many categories. So as of now, so our region is kind of like 4. If you have any other field which is more than 4, you can opt for this kind of a situation where you create a grid and show the visualization accordingly. This is called table with embedded charts. So now let's say, so these are the 3 categories, and let's say where we are only comparing one variable per each of these different few categories or many categories. Let's say we want to compare multiple variables. Okay, instead of one variable across the categories, we want to compare let's say 2 variables. How do we do that? So there is a chart called variable width column chart. Let's quickly go to Tableau. Okay, and let's say I want to create the same chart. In fact, segment, category. Let me take the same chart and try and yeah. So as of now, I can see that hey, I'm splitting my sales across each of these category and segment. Let's say I want to include one more metric in addition to the sales. Let's say profit. What I can do is, as we already once slightly discussed it in one of our in the last session, we can use these other dimensions to a visualization, either color or size, normally to bring in our the effect of a third variable. Let's say, for example, if I bring my profit to color, okay, then it says basically, hey, wherever the darkest shade is there, it's highly profitable segment, and a highly profitable what we call the intersection, and wherever it is lightest, they are the least profitable. So you can use color accordingly, or if not color, normally it is recommended to go with width. So you can put it in size and adjust the size to optimal level. So let's say maybe entire view. Yep. So we can see now each of these bars they are telling information about sales and profits. So the length of the bar represents the sales. So if it's higher, that means this particular bar is more there are more sales here than here, but if we see, though this bar and this bar, though this one has higher sales, it's not than this particular consumer sales in office supplies, it's not as profitable as the same one. So this is having higher width, that means this particular section is having higher profit. So yeah, whenever we want to compare two or more variables, we have to use this sort of additional dimensions we have, either color or size, and we can go for this sort of thing. We can even include third variable using our color option as well, just in case if we are not so keen on having color distinguished by segment. So let's go back to our chart. So these are the comparison across items. So 4 types basically: single variable, few or categories, many categories, and 2 variables across categories. So let's move on to the next part, which is the composition part. So when I say composition, so it normally it's a pretty straightforward term to understand. So basically it means, hey, how are let's take a similar example that we have been looking at till now. How are my sales distributed across each region? That also gives me a composition. Okay, let's say how are my let's say you can also take a market share. Okay, for example, mobile market, okay, electronics market, and how are different top performing companies are have their market shares. So that also gives us a composition. So there are multiple examples that we can think of, and here also we have, let's quickly take a look at what different variants of composition we can we can see, and definitely then we'll go to Tableau. So first, on the left branch, we have something composition changing over time. So how my composition is changing with time, and obviously we have, when we are trying to compare across few time periods or many time periods, okay, in the time, so that is one dimension. And the other next dimension is what are we trying to emphasize on in the composition? Are we only trying to get the relative differences between the whatever the elements that we are trying to compare, or we also would we also need the absolute plus relative differences? Let's go to Tableau and create these charts and discuss these in depth. Okay, let's say I wanna here, and let's create the chart which says where both relative and absolute differences are important for a few time periods frame. Okay, so what I'll do is, so since we are comparing across time, so I'll pull in my time field order date, and I'll keep it at year level, so we have only few periods to compare to. And after that I'll bring in my sales. Let's see. So let me change this to bar, and standard size. Okay, let me do this then. Small place. Okay, so I have my sales across each year, and let's say I want to just see the split of the same sales across categories, okay, in each of the years. So I'll just take my category and put it in color, so I can see now. So in each year, how each color represents a category and how the sales are there in each of those. So this kind of representation is kind of is conveying the absolute differences. So for example, absolute as well as relative. So in this particular, if I can see the length of the that particular mark, the color bar, I can easily compare it with the rest of the bars and see which one is higher and which one is low. And also I can compare this year's let's say furniture sales with any other furniture sales in the alternate years. So I can get a comparison there as well. So it's not only showing the relative in that particular year, but it's also showing you to compare across each years for each of this category. Let's take an example where only relative comparison is important. We can create a similar chart, but just a slightly just a slight variant of the similar chart that would need to be created. What I'll do is there is something called table calculation, and just take a percentage of total and adjust the table calculation to table down. So what it's doing here is, let me explain. Okay, so the top chart that we see here is the one that we saw earlier, where absolute and relative differences matter, and the bottom chart here we have is the one that which we created right now using the table calculation, where within each year it's splitting. Hey, I'll consider this entire bar as 100%, and I'll see how much percentage does each of these categories are having. So this 157k is considering is about like 32% of all the sales that we made in 2017. So if you notice one thing here, we are only getting relative differences. What I mean by that, so if you just notice these marks, okay, number one, here this 32% is reflecting of 157k sales, okay, in furniture. Now think of this one, which is 29% alone. So relatively, if you have to see 32%, 29% is less, but the sales value is far more, this 215k when compared to 57k, which is being represented as 32%. So here in the bottom chart, we are only showing the relative comparison across categories in each year, but we are missing out that, hey, actually this particular blue bar is far more higher than this 32% sales. So that sort of analysis is lost in the bottom chart. So if the client or the audience are only interested in getting the relative analysis, then we can go for the bottom chart. But if they are interested in both, then we should opt for the top one. So that's what here in the chart they are explaining for the first terms. So in over few periods, there are two terms. Only relative differences matter. You have to go with the stacked 100% bar chart, the one that we did at the bottom. And when both the matters, we have to just go with not the percentage, but just the stacked bar chart. Okay, so these are the two cases under few periods. Let's assume the same two cases when we have multiple periods. Okay, let's say I'll go back to the same chart. I'll just duplicate this one. Yeah. And now let's say instead of year, let's say I have more just to bring in more periods, time periods, I will say month. Okay, now just look at it. It's so messy and it's not easy to interpret. So what they suggest is, instead of when you have multiple periods to consider, you have to just change from bar to area chart. So this kind of it's more appealing, and also it's easy to interpret and read. So on the top, again, the same conditions apply as in the previous charts, where it's showing both a relative and as well as absolute, whereas here in the bottom chart it's showing only relative changes with respect to the other categories in that particular time period. And so these are the four variants that are available under over time composition. And now if we go to static composition, so it's not involved with time, we have few variants here as well. Let's see. Obviously we all know pie chart. So a simple when we have to show one quantity as a part of the whole quantity, like it's called share of a total, we just go with the pie chart. But always keep in mind that it's recommended to go with the pie chart only if you have to split the pie chart in less than 3 at max 4 quantities. So in most of the times you can even replace the use of pie chart with a bar chart, which is but if at all you have to use a pie chart, you can go for it as well. Now there's a other comparison in so let's say other composition. So it's called something called waterfall chart, and it's used whenever we want to take this sort of analysis. Either we want to show accumulation or subtraction of a total. Let's discuss what I mean by that. Just a minute. Okay. Normally, if you would see waterfall charts, let's actually stay there for a minute. These sort of charts here, then typically used in, let me give a very broad example that I'm familiar with, is think of a profit and loss statement, P&L statement. So you normally have, hey, so these are all for a company, these are all at the year end. These are all my incomes that the company has generated, and these are all the expenses that the company has put in. So you can create a and you tally all those things, income and expense, and at the end you will be left with the what is my net income in this current year, right? So you can create a waterfall chart for the same. Let's say all the incomes are represented with a upward bar. Let's say I have a income of 100,000, and of that 100,000 I have put in, let's say some 20k for some operating expenses. So my it has reduced, and some other 20k for some other expenses. And then later I have received some 40k additionally. So so those sort of statements, those sort of analysis where you have to look at accumulation, okay, or cumulative collection, how it's changing across time, not necessarily across time, but any categories as well, and look at the final result. You can get an overview picture of what has contributed to your up, what has contributed to your over, in this particular example, what has contributed to your income, what has contributed expense. You can take a look at them individually, and also you can get the what is my final current status towards the end of the year. So there are multiple examples otherwise, other than profit and loss or income expenses, where you can use waterfall chart, but let's not get there. But remember, wherever we have to use something like accumulation, cumulative, or results, when we have to show that, we can potentially look into this direction of to show them in the waterfall chart. Let's go back to Tableau and try and create one quickly. So let's say for the time being, let's just go with, since we are using this data, let's just go with some yeah. Before that, actually, let me filter some data. Okay. So if I say as the category sales, I just want to take some, okay, instead of sales, let's say profit. I want to include few categories where we have profit and loss, so that would be ideal for our waterfall chart. So let's take tables, let's take supplies, let's take labels, let's take this one as well, let's take cases, and should also be fine. Just keep these alone and remove this. Okay. Now let me drag in my year, or in fact my quarter for a date. Okay. And my profit, and change this to bar. Okay, maybe okay, it's okay. Just a minute, guys. Okay, if you would see here, I'm just plotting what is my profit across each of the quarters. You can see the initial number here is negative, so obviously it means there's a loss in this particular quarter. There's a profit, loss, and profit. So this is similar. I'm trying to get the data in filtering certain categories and all, trying to get it in a shape where I can actually create a waterfall chart for the example that I've talked about. So obviously towards the end of the time, we can get hey, this is all my profits that I've collected, these are all my losses, so I can at the end I can see what is my net profit or net loss towards the end. So this is a typical kind of scenario where I can use a waterfall chart and explain the same. So how to quickly create a waterfall chart? First thing is to get the cumulative differences. I know here this is my loss, but here this is my profit. So at this particular point, whatever my net profit or sales, and I need to calculate that. So this loss plus profit, so that will give me my net profit or loss. So likewise, I need to calculate that across each and every point. So I'll make use of some table calculation which gives me the same, so which is running total, which basically sums up all as we move across the axis. And so yeah, so if you can see, this is my initial loss, and here from this loss I've just excluded whatever the portion that I got profit, and my loss is reduced. And likewise towards the end I can see my total. I actually have made some net loss of some minus $3,000. So I'll remove this now, since I've made a cumulative one. This is not quite exactly as a waterfall chart, but let's now quickly create a simple calculation which says profit. Okay, and create it in size. Okay. Okay, let me change this to Gantt bar. Okay, and also let me pull this perfect color. Okay, so if you can see here, let me actually bring in my profit as well for study purposes. Okay, so in the first quarter I have made so much amount of loss. Okay, and the same, so wherever you see red is a loss, so that's the period where we made loss, and wherever we see green or slightly gray is something like where we made profit. So let's say here I've made this much amount of loss. Okay, and if you would see, okay, actually just some coloring difference. Okay, I need to color this with the right field. Right, and here as well, I guess. Right, so red in profit, loss in red, and profit in blue. So and yeah, so this is my loss I've made in the first quarter, and in the second quarter I've made some gain, some profit. So obviously my profit has reduced. I've ended here and it's went up to my this is my, as of now, the current loss. And in the third quarter also I made some more profit, so my net profit has increased to somewhere around like 500k, and again I've made some more profit again. This 500k has increased from 500k to some 1200k. In the next quarter I've made some loss, and likewise it continues, and towards the end I've made this overall, so I've made this much amount of total loss, $3,000 or something. So this is how a typical waterfall chart we can create. So the calculation and all, it's something that we can keep it for other session there. So yeah. So that's on the waterfall chart, and a few other other metrics, like let's say if you are trying to compare multiple subcomponents across not across time but just statically, we can refer to the similar chart which we have created for here. So where basically the top chart here, it's a same stacked bar chart. where we are trying to compare sales across a certain category on x-axis. Here it's year, but need not necessarily be year here, and we are trying to just see how different categories stack up in that particular category. And the third and actually the fourth and the final one is the tree map. Okay, it's a pretty famous one as well, where we are trying to kind of get an accumulation kind effect which we got in waterfall chart, and also as a comparison of total, both basically absolute sense as well. So let's just create one and discuss there. So let's select few fields, category, subcategory, and I want our sales. Let me just quickly go to show me and create a tree map. So if you can see here, when I hover on a tree map, it shows one or more dimensions at the bottom, or to one or more measures. So I have selected 2 dimensions and 1 measure, so it's allowing me to create this chart, and I'll create so let me just color it accordingly and get back. Put my category in colors. Okay, so now each of the color that we see here is representing a certain category, and each of the squares that we see, rectangles that we see within that category, represents a certain subcategory within that category. So I can pull in my sales as well into label, and I can see. Okay, so in my technology category, the phones subcategory is having some $330,000, and can compare it with across some other subcategories. I can also get a overview of how my phones sales are, phones subcategory sales are in comparison with my overall sales. So I can clearly see that phones is having a significant contribution, whereas my other subcategories like fasteners or envelopes, they are not so much when compared to my overall sales. I can also get within category what are my sales, and also other analysis that we can get is how are my sales for each of the categories, so each of the color regions in comparison with the total. So there are lots of analysis that are possible, both relative and absolute. So whenever we need, it's also pretty popular approach when we are trying to show composition across categories, both relative and absolute. Okay, I think we have covered all the chart types that we have here. So comparison, distribution, relationship, and composition. So yeah, again, just to a reminder towards the end, it's just a thought starter. So normally whenever you want to create some visualization, it will definitely give you a good, it's definitely a good place to start, but not necessarily it need not be the final step, or the there is no necessary that you have to definitely go for one of the chart types that you see here. So it definitely depends upon the situation and the audience that you're trying to cater. You have to obviously customize it a little, and if needed, you have to combine a couple of charts and get the result out of it. It's just a starter for you, just to give you the direction, but yeah, you have to take it from there and create your own visualization when needed. Okay, if you have any questions, you can let me know. Otherwise, we can call it a day. Okay,